You're listening to the TOEFL podcast, number 22. This is the TOEFL podcast, the Test of English as a Foreign Language podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff McQuillan. I'm your host, coming to you from the Center for Educational Development in Los Angeles, California. This is the podcast for those studying for the TOEFL exam, as well as the IELTS, the International English Language Testing System exam, and other standard English exams. Our topic today is going to be a lecture on the atmosphere, on what is called atmospheric science, or the weather. And as usual, we will first listen to the story at a slow speed, followed by explanations. Then we will listen again to the lecture at a fast speed, and finally, a comprehension question. Let's get started. We've been talking about weather phenomena this week, and one such phenomenon that affects this region of the country is El Niño. An El Niño occurs when there is a warming of the ocean surface along the South American coast. This warm water current is usually associated with atmospheric changes. As the warm water spreads toward the east, it takes along with it rain. This results in rainfall in areas that are normally dry. We classify an occurrence as El Niño when the water temperature is greater than 0.5 degrees Celsius across the central tropical region of the Pacific Ocean for a period longer than 5 months. So, how often do they occur? Generally speaking, we see El Niños every 3 to 5 years, although it may be as long as 7 years between occurrences. We normally see these patterns in late December, hence the name El Niño, which means the Christ child in Spanish. El Niño episodes in recent years have lasted no longer than a few weeks or a month. After this time, the weather patterns go back to normal. But there have been some cases of it lasting longer, several months in fact, which can have serious effects on the economy, such as the local fishing trade and the international markets that rely on it. Now, if you'll turn to page 362 in your textbook, you'll see a diagram. This lecture is on atmospheric science. The atmosphere, A-T-M-O-S-P-H-E-R-E, the atmosphere is what is up in the sky, what is above the ground is the atmosphere. It includes the air and the clouds and everything up until you reach space outside of the atmosphere of a planet, in this case of Earth. So atmospheric science is the part of science that studies the weather, for example. And in this lecture, we heard about a phenomenon called El Niño. In fact, the lecture begins, we've been talking about weather phenomena this week. And one such phenomenon is El Niño. A phenomenon is something that happens. Often in science, we'll talk about a phenomenon, means when something happens, when a certain situation exists. And the plural of phenomenon is phenomena, with an A at the end. Well, the phenomenon they're talking about is El Nino. The lecture says it affects this region of the country. To affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, means that it has an influence on, or it does something to, this region of the country. A region, R-E-G-I-O-N, is an area of the country. The name of this particular phenomenon is El Nino. Now, an El Nino, the lecture says, occurs or happens when there is a warming of the ocean surface. The surface is the top of something. You can have the surface of a desk. That would be the top of the desk. Well, the ocean surface, S-U-R-F-A-C-E, is the top part of the water that is near the top of the water. The El Nino happens when there is a warming of the ocean surface along the South American coast. Along the coast means, in this case, near the coast. The coast, of course, is the part of land that is next to water. In this case, next to the Pacific Ocean in South America. The lecture continues, this warm water current is usually associated with atmospheric changes. A current, C-U-R-R-E-N-T, is when a part of the water or the air is moving in a certain direction, and the water or air around it, next to it, is not moving as much. So you can have air currents, you can have ocean currents. It's when the water moves in a certain direction. Well, when the warm water moves in a certain direction, this is usually associated with, meaning related to, this is connected to atmospheric changes. Remember, atmospheric is the adjective for atmosphere, the air above the earth and everything else. As the warm water spreads toward the east, meaning as it moves towards the east and begins to move over a larger and larger area. When we say something spreads, S-P-R-E-A-D-S, we usually mean that it starts in a small area and moves to a larger area. You can have a disease that spreads. It may start in one country and move to other countries. You can also have a rumor that spreads. A rumor, R-U-M-O-R, something that is probably not true, some piece of information. First, just a couple people know, and then many people know. That's called spreading the rumor, telling other people. Well, here we're talking about the warm air over the ocean that spreads or moves towards the east. And it takes along with it rain. To take along means that it brings with it rain. So as the air moves, the air that's over the warm water currents, as it moves to the east, it also has water with it and causes rain. This results in rainfall in areas that are normally dry. Rainfall, R-A-I-N-F-A-L-L, is all one word, is really just another name for rain. And notice that in this sentence in the lecture, this results in, we use the verb to result, R-U-S-U-L-T, in. To result in means, in this case, to cause, to be the cause of. This results in or causes rainfall in areas that are normally dry, that normally do not have rain. The lecture continues, we classify an occurrence in El Nino when the water temperature is greater than a half a degree or 0.5 degrees Celsius. To classify, classify, means to categorize, to put something in a category, to give it a name, to give it a label. When we classify an occurrence as El Niño, this happens when the water temperature is greater than 0.5 degrees Celsius. Celsius, of course, is the way that you measure temperature in science. In the United States, we do not use Celsius for talking about the weather normally. We use the Fahrenheit scale, but most of the world uses a Celsius scale. The water temperatures have to be greater than 0.5 degrees Celsius. And notice we can say that in many ways, 0.5 or just 0.5 or even a half a degree Celsius. Across the tropical region of the Pacific Ocean. The tropical, tropical, are areas that are near the equator, near the middle of the earth, and usually tend to be very warm. Well, the tropical region of the Pacific Ocean is what we are talking about here, and we have an El Niño when the temperature is greater than a half a degree Celsius for a period longer than 5 months. Means for a time longer than 5 months, for a period longer than 5 months. How often do these El Niños occur? Well, in the lecture, the professor says, generally speaking, meaning normally, under normal circumstances, or the usual case is, we see El Niños every 3 to 5 years. Means we will observe them every 3 to 5 years. They will happen every 3 to 5 years. Although it may be as long as 7 years between occurrences. An occurrence comes from the verb to occur, O-C-C-U-R. To occur means to happen. So an occurrence as a noun means something that happens, a situation, an occurrence, when something takes place. We normally see these El Niño occurrences, these patterns, in late December. And a pattern, P-A-T-T-E-R-N, is something that usually follows a certain sequence, certain steps, or a certain design. We talk about a pattern in science means something that happens over and over again. The same sequence, the same steps. In this case, the pattern for the El Niño is the warming of the water and the spreading of the air to the east. Well, the lecture says that we normally see these patterns in late December, hence the name El Niño. Hence, H-E-N-C-E means the same here as therefore, as a result of, and or because of that fact. We call these El Niño because in December, in the Christian religion, they celebrate the birth of Christ. Christmas, we call it in English. And El Niño means the Christ child, or the Christ as a baby. El Niño is the same as, in this case, the small child. And it refers to the Christ child in Spanish. That's where the name El Niño comes from. Well, the lecture continues. El Niño episodes in recent years have lasted no longer than a few weeks, or a month. The episode, E-P-I-S-O-D-E, is the same as the occurrence, when these things happen. They lasted no longer, means they did not take place longer than a few weeks or a month. And after that happens, the weather returns to normal. It goes back to normal, the way it used to be before El Nino. There have been cases, however, where El Nino and the effects of El Nino last several months. And this can have serious effects on the economy. When we say something has a serious effect, E-F-F-E-C-T, a serious effect means a bad or negative effect, usually. It has a serious effect on the economy, means the economy is going to be worse because of it. In particular, the local fishing trade. And when we talk about trade, T-R-A-D-E, here we just mean business, the local fishing business in South America, in these South American countries that are affected by El Nino. Also, the international markets are affected. The international markets, again, markets, M-A-R-K-E-T-S, just means the international business in this case, that rely on it, that depend on it. Now let's listen to the lecture, this time at a native rate of speech. We've been talking about weather phenomena this week, and one such phenomenon that affects this region of the country is El Nino. And El Nino occurs when there is warming of the ocean surface along the South American coast. This warm water current is usually associated with atmospheric changes. As the warm water spreads towards the east, it takes along with it rain. This results in rainfall in areas that are normally dry. We classify an occurrence as El Nino when the water temperature is greater than 0.5 degrees Celsius across the central tropical region of the Pacific Ocean for a period longer than 5 months. So, how often do they occur? Generally speaking, we see El Niños every 3 to 5 years, although it may be as long as 7 years between occurrences. We normally see these patterns in late December, hence the name El Niño, which means the Christ child in Spanish. El Nino episodes in recent years have lasted no longer than a few weeks or a month. After this time, the weather patterns go back to normal. But there have been some cases of it lasting longer, several months in fact, which can have serious effects on the economy, such as the local fishing trade and the international markets that rely on it. Now, if you'll turn to page 362 in your textbook, you'll see a diagram. Now let's ask a comprehension question. According to the lecture, which of the following is a necessary condition for the occurrence of El Nino? A. Warm water temperatures above 5 degrees Celsius. B. Rainfall that occurs in normally dry areas. C. The warming of the water temperature for more than 5 months in the central tropical region. Or D. A pattern of weather in the Pacific Ocean returning to normal. The correct answer is C. The warming of the water temperature for more than 5 months in the central tropical region. The other 3 answers were all incorrect. The first answer, A, warm water temperatures above 5 degrees Celsius, is incorrect because in the lecture they said above 0.5, which is a half a degree Celsius. B, rainfall occurs in normally dry areas, is a result or a consequence of El Nino. It is not a cause of El Nino. The cause of El Nino is not related to the rainfall. The rainfall happens after El Nino is occurring. C is the correct answer. The water temperature warms for more than 5 months in the central tropical region. D, a pattern of weather in the Pacific Ocean returning to normal is incorrect. That's what happens after an El Niño is over. After it ends, the pattern of weather usually returns to normal. That's all we have time for on today's TOEFL podcast. Be sure to visit our website at TOEFLPod22 TOEFLPod.com. And if you have any questions or suggestions, you can email us at TOEFLPod@TOEFLPod.com. From Los Angeles, California, I'm Jeff McQuillan. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the TOEFL Podcast. The TOEFL Podcast is written and produced by Dr. Lucy Say. Your host is Dr. Jeff McQuillan. This podcast is copyright 2006 by the Center for Educational Development. TOEFL is a registered trademark of the Educational Testing Service, which does not endorse and was not involved in the production of this podcast.